And we're live. You're watching Interchain FM, the Cosmos radio station. If you're seeking alpha, look no further. I'm your host, Django Unchained. So before we get started, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new to this channel, and hit the like button to show some love. So if you would like to support this channel, we are now monetized. So at the end of each show, you can comment or send a super sticker, and then we will pick your comment or question out of the chat. So this is our last live stream right before the holidays. And during the holidays, in the last 2 Thursdays of December, we're going to publish pre-recordings. So this is our final live stream before we see you for the next year. So today we're here with Josh Lee. Josh Lee, aka Dogemos, the original Dogemos, is here with us. He's the co-founder of Keplr wallet, or Chainapsis rather, which is one of two entities behind Osmosis Labs. Welcome to the show, Dogemos.
Hey, happy to be here. I can't believe it took this long, but I'm glad at least I'm here now.
You're here
Really
now,
excited.
yeah.
I used to
we've
help
been
run
working
this in the backstage. I remember, you posted this video of Suzu, SPF, Sunny, Eric Voorhees, and you. I remember. I'm pretty sure I ran this StreamYard thing in the background. So
I think it was
yeah,
you. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
kind of like full circle now. So
We're here full circle. I mean, so much has happened now. And I'm glad you're here now, Dogemos. So,
yeah.
I mean, so much has been built, and Keplr is now the number one wallet. I mean, when we started this, Interchain FM, back when the both of us were at Tendermint, this Keplr didn't exist even.
Keplr didn't exist.
Yeah, IBC wasn't launched. I think we were still trying to launch mainnet.
No, I joined after mainnet. So
it was after
mainnet has
okay.
been launched.
Okay.
IBC was delayed in the typical kind of Cosmos fashion, and everyone was waiting for that. So.
Okay. Sorry. All the years kind of blend into themselves now at this point. Yeah. Okay. So now Keplr is the number one interchain wallet. It's the de facto one that everyone who enters into the Cosmos ecosystem uses. Look at, I looked at some numbers that you showed me, and Keplr has over 500,000 unique users, or not unique users, unique wallets, not users. And it supports most of all of the major live Cosmos chains in the ecosystem. So it makes sense that something like sovereign digital identity interchain name service would be enabled through this gateway, right? Because you have the biggest distribution to the most amount of people throughout Cosmos. So yeah, let's talk about that. I kind of alluded to this in some of our our teaser tweets, but wallets are not gonna just be wallets anymore, are they? Do you see that too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to be honest, I think the term digital identity has a lot of, I don't know, suit and tie nuance. I don't know what the right alternative phrase for that would be, where it captures a lot more of hey, you are, we're not trying to basically map your humanity to the blockchain, but try to think of this yeah, exactly, right. And I think there's a lot of value in anonymous people in on Twitter, on these different accounts, and at the same time, each of these accounts sort of have pseudonymous reputation, and how you earn that is by using the blockchain with your account. I think traditionally we've sort of been in this very legacy blockchain wallet mindset of, hey, your account is basically just like a public key of your private key. And I think that's where we started. But as the amount of interactions that you can do on chain increases, there's sort of this kind of different ways to show credibility or reputation of your pseudonymous identity as an account through these actions that you have taken. And if you think about it, where everyone sort of starts using a blockchain is a wallet, whether that wallet is in the form of a command line, or whether that's Keplr, or a completely custodial wallet through an exchange. But all of these things are wallets, right? It's a very large umbrella that I think misses on a lot of kind of like nuances and meanings on what it can be in the future. And I think this is even more amplified in Cosmos because we have this ecosystem that has multiple chains, and your account, even though it's sort of this like the same public key, uh, when it exists on a different chain, it you kind of lose this like history and reputation of credibility that you could earn through your former actions. Like, let's say, hey, I don't know if this is the right like reputation, but it's something in the history books where like, hey, I got wrecked in Luna, and like, how can I, it's like if there is a wreck drop that's coming, how can I kind of bring over this like reputation, proof that I am this, account on the Terra blockchain onto Osmosis or some other chain. And um, even though you're sort of the same public key across all of these blockchains, your identity and reputation sort of isn't portable. And but from a user level, that's like very confusing because you're like, yeah, I've been interacting with all these blockchains using the same wallet. Why isn't it connected? And it was sort of one of those things where like I didn't set out with the realization of like, hey, there's a lot of this cool space around on-chain identity, reputation, social credit, and things like that. But as we were building a wallet, it just kind of like became more apparent. And then realizing that like, yeah, wallets are sort of this like, if IBC is a technology that connects um blockchains through like how blockchains transfer data, wallets are sort of this like, currently at least, in its current form, this off-chain layer that connects my identity and my on-chain reputation through these blockchains. So it's like a human IBC, like for reputation and identity. Now, that isn't in the form of a very formalized or like specified protocol, but in its like utility and the way that you use it, it definitely exists. I think our goal is to basically be able to amplify and be able to create a more like organic specification and protocol around it, so that as you are interacting with the same chain across different blockchains, you are able to basically keep this history of you on the blockchain going. And if you don't want to expose your like real life identity, that's fine, because hopefully most of these things will purely derive out of your actions on the blockchain itself.
Is there an opt-in portion of this where, let's say, if we do not want to have our reputations ported across various different Sybil wallets or Sybil addresses, can we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most people are maybe failing to realize this, but it's sort of already happening at the blockchain layer, right? Like your actions as an account, as a wallet address, is already being recorded onto the blockchain. And if you want to kind of, stop that link, you basically try, you don't do a chain of transactions from your account to your account B to your account C. You try to kind of find ways to uh, explicitly kind of cut off that like link between your accounts. And I think most of these would be an opt-in system where like, yeah, I think there's value in me showing my account that I've been using as, from like the genesis. Like, so I have this one wallet that I've been using since like 2019, I think. That was like the test Keplr wallet. And this is the wallet that I sent the first Atom like IBC transaction in the entire world with. And for me, that's like, it has a lot of meaning, right? And um it's one of those accounts that I've been testing with, I've been sharing addresses with. So like, if people really wanted to track like, hey, who owns this wallet, they probably could, and it's not that hard, that hard to do. And that's the wallet that I would probably link to my like real personal identity. For me doing, I don't know, like shitcoin trading, I probably wouldn't want to link my identity to that and would use a completely separate account. So um, I think there's kind of a different part here where I think there is definitely a privacy component of the blockchain where it's like, hey, you using your interactions on the blockchain should remain private. And right now, you sort of don't have this option where all of your actions are recorded on the blockchain. It doesn't have your name on it. It definitely has your address on it. Now, there's also this kind of the other polar opposite, which is also beneficial, where it's like, yeah, I would like to kind of rep the fact that I sent the first Atom IBC transaction in the entire world, and I should also be able to do that. So, yeah, like right now we're in this kind of like awkward in between phase, I think.
Yeah, you kind of opened up a rabbit hole here because you're alluding to this idea that, well, these reputation based things are interesting because it lends itself to you getting like more airdrops. I think. I mean, you're right. Like very tangibly, like what do you want people to know that a little tidbit of information about your wallet for, if not to get some kind of financial reward for it, because the people that are launching projects are wanting to onboard early people. I just redeemed my Stride airdrop, have various different wallets and noticed that my they sequence the account numbers by age, and then the oldest ones got way more
Exactly.
airdrop, right?
Yeah, so and I think that's a perfect like example of using data that's already on the blockchain, putting more meaning into it, and kind of like being able to filter out by these things, right? Like, account number one on this blockchain is definitely more meaningful than like the latest account that someone just created to do spam transactions. So, Cosmos has this culture of airdropping tokens as a bootstrapping mechanism, and I think that's wonderful. Um, but we're also going into this direction where before, if you got an airdrop, typically most projects outside of Cosmos just did like, hey, you get a one-to-one airdrop based on your token balance, and I think that's the most boring way to do it. When we launched Osmosis, we basically explicitly tried to do more um, of an opinionated take on airdrops based on your balances with like the quadratic airdrop. You need to do actions, and I think this is sort of catching on to other parts of the ecosystem as well. And I think that we can go even further than this, right? Like where it's like right now the biggest difficulty around like doing opinionated airdrops on things like that are like, how do I find the list of addresses that have this? And maybe trying to kind of simplify that incentivizes you to um, use the blockchain more, and kind of with the expectation that, hey, maybe if I do more of these things, like there is more in it for me in the future. And on the other side of things, I think um there's I have mixed feelings about DAOs, where on one side I think DAOs are incredibly cool, but I also think that DAOs are product that sort of is out of sequence with like how organically DAOs should develop. And right now we have, and what I mean by that, I think, is like right now we have DAOs that have a explicit purpose on what it does, and then you have members. But if you think about in like the very human, like skeleton and meat context, like how you form entities, organization, teams, you like start out as an individual, and then based on things you do, things you like, your interests, or where you live, whatever, you sort of create social groups around you as an individual. And um based off of that, like you get bigger groups of people, which in turn turns into like companies, teams, friend groups, and eventually DAOs. And you sort of get this like purpose. Like you start with like, hey, here's what I'm interested in, here's what I want to do as an individual, and you end up in a group. Whereas I think DAOs sort of have this upside down where like, hey, we want to bootstrap this like organization that has it's like, we intend to do this, but we are missing this entire like in between stack of like this organization that's meant to do a specific task or has this vision, execute on something, and then the individuals that make up for it. And oftentimes, how we've compensated to prevent like spam or bad actors is like use tokens as a way of gating things. But that's just like a very boring way to organize people into groups. So yeah, I think that's one of those things where like more meaningful pseudonymous identities on chain uh, will in turn create better DAOs, better social groups, and things like that. And we want to build this more of this bottom up system where you have more meaning as an account on the chain, and then you have more of this like light social groups, right? Where it's like, hey, it's basically Discord, but with more context on you as a user on the blockchain rather than some username and profile. And then based off of that, you kind of find like-minded people who can prove that they're like-minded in the sense that like I have a record of me doing these things, and then you sort of kind of end up in the DAOs. So yeah.
Yeah. Is there some element of vetting for skill set and capability in that?
So I think that's I think there absolutely will be. Now, and I also think there'll be multiple ways of doing it. And um the right way to do like on-chain social groups, entities, DAOs is um you have multiple ways of and multiple different takes on who is the right person for this. Like, you have credit rating systems in the TradFi world where like, hey, are you eligible to take out this loan? And they put the entire population of I don't know, like in of the US with one standard, right? Because what they want to do is like, yeah, they want to put you as like into this like as generic of a number that profiles everyone and banks are willing to accept at the least like smallest level, because we're built for a system where we try to like build efficiency at scale by simplifying things, dumbing things down, and then you have like the larger you are, you're sort of more efficient, whereas crypto ecosystems provide this way of like you build bottom up systems where it's like you're able to have more different takes. It's like, hey, so I have a DAO on Doge, like on DAO that's called Dogemos DAO, and all it is just like people I've asked around me to like, hey, do you want to be in a DAO? And it's like, what is it for? It's like, I don't know, but I'm just gonna put like the initial treasury. You guys figure out what to do. But I feel like it's gonna go somewhere because I like the initial members. I already know who they are, and then eventually maybe it'll become something big. But I don't know. But like we're trying to build this like and that entire initial curation sort of started by me. And a Chango DAO could be some its criteria could be completely different. Trying to create a DAO around curating which projects gets funding for grants like would have a different set of criteria. And what you want is like sort of like kind of how DeFi had its boom based off of the composability that it offered. You want to be able to create social groups and DAOs based off of like more of these composable identities. And you sort of get to like pick and choose like, oh, I like this characteristic, or I like this trait, or I like people who have this kind of history and things like that. So trying to create a more composable method of putting accounts into groups, I think, is a very interesting direction.
So we touched on two major applications of on-chain identities. The first is obviously airdrop redemption qualification. The next one is pre-qualifying for a DAO. The last one, maybe not final one, that I want to touch on, the most obvious application would be domain names, right? That's where ICNS is headed. That's where Handshake is at, and working backwards to make it useful for users. And then that's also kind of where we're headed with Interchain name service, as well as the Stargaze upcoming name service and Star Name. So, what is your take on domain names? Are we going to go there eventually, or are we thinking we're going to strictly stay like in blockchain land and it's just vanity pub keys for Interchain names?
Yeah. So I think when you try to create scarcity around anything, you can. That being said, whether this scarcity translate into value is a completely different thing. And I think that's kind of the nice thing about having different kinds of namespace, name services, and things like that, where you could have a name service that's more focused on this aspect of its utility or another aspect, or so it's like I think Handshake did a more of this, like it's like, hey, we're trying to go for this like DNS space and compete in that. I think for me personally, for ICNS, obviously I've been really interested in some of this like pseudonymous identity. How can my Osmo One ABCD sort of also have the same meaning as Cosmos One, FGHI, whatever, like, and I think the domain name that we're creating, which is ICNS, is more in terms of that utility, more so than like, hey, we're trying to replace like the DNS like namespace and things like that. And and having different takes on how you use that is obviously important. And having a varied take on it, I wouldn't say it's like one is wrong or over the other. Just different takes on what drives the value of the name is, what drives the value of the name, as well as it's like it's a name service, so it's like there's the name, but there's also this service part. So I think pretty often we miss out on like a lot of the service part of the name service is pretty underrated, I think, over the name part, because people try to collect the rarest names, but like if you can't really use that name anywhere, then it really doesn't have that much value, right? So yeah.
So, yeah, when you say service, what specific services are you referring to?
Yeah, so I think it can be something as simple as like, hey, when I send um money to this person, I don't have to know this person's address. I can just go off of by their Twitter handle. So that's like the very basic low hanging fruit there. And I think most name services try to go for this. But in the context of us building this wallet, like ICNS is bootstrapping based off of it's like, hey, we were basically hard spooning the Twitter namespace into this like on-chain namespace. And I think the reason why we want to do it is because it's like, hey, what's the fairest way that you can distribute a namespace? And I think you have different opinions on it. That being said, it's like, hey, Twitter has been around for a while. I don't think people created Twitter names with the expectation of like, oh, I could flip this and sell this. And I think that's a very important part, right? Like, where if you create a name service with the expectation that like, yeah, you can sell this, I think people try to go for the rarest names. Now, if what we're trying to focus on is more on the service part. So it's like, hey, you've been using this name for a while. Now, here's the additional set of things that you can do. So, for example, we offer users to create Cosmos wallets, logging into their Google accounts through a service called Web3 Auth, which is fantastic because you never, you don't have to deal with like mnemonics and private keys and things like that. You just sign into your Google wallet and you have a Cosmos wallet. Now we could also offer this for like Twitter, right? Like Twitter has it's the same kind of Web3 Auth supports logging in via Twitter. Now, what if you just sort of like start your crypto journey not with creating a like a 12-word mnemonic, but like you just sign in with Twitter and instantly you already have an account on chain that's called, for me, like Dogemos dot whatever, as well as like the private key linked to my kind of like my Twitter login. Now, obviously that's very insecure. So I think the kind of directions that we're more interested in is like um, right now we have this notion of like, hey, one private key equals one public key, and you can't really switch these things around. So if I started staking on, account A and I don't want to use it anymore, I want to start using account B because my account B is this different key that I manage. Um, you basically have to unstake, you have to move it around, and it's annoying, right? But I think we want to remove this idea that like your account on chain is strictly linked to the keys that's like that the account derived from. So let's say if I have Dogemos on Osmosis, we want the experience to be like, hey, my account is Dogemos, not my public key of my very insecure Twitter private key. But I can start my crypto journey with that. That being said, as I do more high valued things and custody more assets on chain, I would like to have a better option of using a different set of keys, like for example, my ledger. And I think the way to go forward here is you have an account on chain and you're able to link different private keys to that account, and you set authorizations on what each key can do, or a mix of these keys can do. And then as an extension of that, you can set recovery addresses for, like, hey, if I flip, like fall down the staircase and I just die or something, I have someone who can recover my keys, right? And my tokens aren't lost forever. And for me to do that, the experience isn't, hey mom, like, can you create this mnemonic? Can you tell me what your public key is so I can set my, you know, like permission, like account, like recovery account to your thing. You're just like, hey, I would like these like Twitter names to be my kind of sort of guardians. And none of these ideas are new in crypto, right? Like a lot of these ideas have existed, but in the most Cosmos, like typical Cosmos fashion, I feel like the interesting things around these ideas are when it comes together in a very application specific stack. And that's what we're good at. And, we've built uh, the largest Cosmos wallet in the space. We were also very much involved in building the UX around osmosis. So, what if you kind of like go further and try to create a more application specific use case for how account management is done, or recovery addresses are done, or spending limits are done, and things like that. And obviously this won't be like a proprietary standard. Everything would just be a completely open standard that everyone else can opt into. That being said, how you make progress isn't sitting in a group, and like being in a Zoom call with 12 different people, letting them know it's like, hey, how do we move forward here? What we want to do, it's like, hey, here's what's possible. If you'd like to kind of opt into the standard, you're more than welcome to, and your users would love it. So yeah, here, this is some ideas that we have going forward.
What did you mean by application specific for account management?
Yeah. So one of the, I think, things that are getting discussed a lot in the Ethereum lands is account abstraction, where right now you have this very strict barrier between what is an externally owned account, by so like a private key based account, versus a smart contract wallet. And when Argent first came around, it was revolutionary in its UX, because like, hey, this account isn't mapped to your private key. It's a smart contract that you control with your private key, but you can also programmatically set permissions, because it's a smart contract that you sort of use as a wallet, right? But kind of the issue when you have this like large platform, is it's hard to find consensus on, hey, what should be the right standard for a wallet. Like, you just have too many involved parties where, like, hey, we have 20 different wallets, 200 different dApps. Core developers has this opinion, and it's like, so trying to make a change on what an account is on the blockchain, on a very like generic smart contract platform, there's just way more consideration and work that goes into it. And I think even in the ETH lands, it's going to take a while for account abstraction to get finalized as an EIP, adopted, shipped, and then even after it's shipped at the platform level, it'll take more time before it's implemented at the wallet level. Whereas it's like, hey, if you have a chain, and it's like, if you have a chain, you sort of are able to define, hey, me as this DEX application would like accounts to be more suited for self-custody. And that means we want to compete with centralized exchanges. And one of the benefits that centralized exchanges offer is custodying, they custody your assets. So it's like very convenient for you to use. So we'd like to make a set of changes that make decentralized self-custody as easy as like centralized exchange custody. And you don't have to, like, when you're in Cosmos, you don't have to uh try to convince 100 other chains for you to make this chain. Like, you can just do that. You can ship it, make consensus with your community and your validators, and it's shipped. Now, on the other side of that is, hey, can you get wallets to use this? And this is where one of those things where Cosmos being a smaller ecosystem shines, where you can actually innovate faster because you don't have to try to find consensus for you know for every single wallet that exists. You can sort of create a mesh of, hey, here are the mesh of wallets, a mesh of chains, mesh of web apps that kind of support this standard that this text shipped. So it's easier for you to make changes because you don't have to um yeah, you don't have to aim for like the least common denominator for what could be the future of crypto.
You're not saying that in order to achieve account abstraction that there needs to be a smart contract managing this, right?
No, because you can technically do this at the module level. That being said, I think Cosmosm,
What about the
I think,
client level?
I mean, at the client level, it's like it can be anything, right? Like, I think Keplr so far, we've positioned ourselves as more of this generic Cosmos SDK wallet. Um, and Keplr is at the user level, I think three different products. Like you have the extension, you have the dashboard, you have the mobile wallet. And the extension itself, it's like completely open source. Its aim is to support as many Cosmos chains as possible, and that's why we allow people to just like add your chain into Keplr, even if it's a test net, like because it's meant to kind of support that like wide amount of signing needs and key management needs and things like that. That being said, on the web app side, like I think we can be a little bit more opinionated on creating a more flushed out experience that like, hey, here's an experience you'd probably enjoy. You'll still be using, Keplr extension to sign things, or maybe even like other wallets, right? Like just because it's like, we have Keplr dashboard, that doesn't mean that like we limit access to it to just our wallet. I think that we're completely open to like having more extension wallets be able to access dashboards in the future, but the dashboard as a product in itself is able to create a more streamlined experience for a smaller set of use cases. That being said, do that extremely well rather than aim, it's just like, oh, just because this one chain doesn't use this standard, I can't push this, amazing new feature that would benefit 99% of people. So I think that's kind of our stance where like, I think Sunny mentioned this like T model where like you integrate a few core features and applications really well. And then you also at the same time support a wide amount of kind of like generic needs of everything that exists out there. And you sort of have to need to do this both things at the same time.
Yeah. So you alluded to basically airdropping a handle, an ICNS handle, to everyone on Twitter. That's actually similar to the way BitClout went to market. I mean, those are some good ideas, but
Yeah.
somehow people viewed BitClout as a scam.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Also, what's the difference between this and Starname?
Yeah, so I'd love to address the BitCloud part first because that's like such a good example of like why ICNS and things like that. And I think there's a lot of nuanced things under the hood of like what makes a name service successful, what makes an application or a blockchain successful that at the surface level is very easy to see. It's like, hey, BitCloud used Twitter namespace to bootstrap its, I don't know, like decentralized social network, and ICNS is doing the same. Now, I think how you utilize an existing namespace, like anyone can do anything with it. That being said, like who owns BitCloud? And like the issue was BitCloud, even though it forked, even though the namespace was, I think, distributed fairly, uh, at the end of the day, the ownership of the platform was purely in the hands of like few early VCs that backed I forgot that like founder's name that did basis. Um and it was owned by that, right? Like so ultimately it wasn't all it did was like, yeah, this is a namespace that is already valuable because it's on Twitter, but we're just going to use this on our platform that we own and we will sell our tokens to you. Whereas I think ICNS, were like the intention with this is like it's meant to be more on the um, emphasis on the integrators and the web apps and people to be run by people who are building the client side software of Cosmos. And I think that's kind of the core differences, right? Like, um, maybe this is kind of a little bit like a touchy topic, but I want to mention it because, like, we did have a name service called Starname for a while. That being said, like, what makes a name service successful is just as much how much are you able to use this name in the different services that are maybe not even on the blockchain level, but like at the wallet level, at the explorer level, at the web app level, the dashboard level, and things like that. And we've seen, like, launching a name service from a technical standpoint isn't very difficult. um, what's very difficult is like how you work with different stakeholders and how do you incentivize these diverse set of stakeholders who are also putting in work to build these things, and ensuring that like there's enough incentives for them to use your um, name service. That could exist in multiple ways. It could be economic incentives, but not only that, but like, is there legitimacy around this namespace, or who owns, who benefits from this namespace, like name service. And there's a lot of different things that needs to be put into consideration. And um I think a lot of name services often fail to capture it. I think they focus a lot about the distribution of the name itself, but not so much on the service side. And that's why we felt like, all right, on the ICNS side, this is more on. We have 4 committee members, which is Chainapsis, building Keplr wallet, and then Cosmos Station, who's also building Cosmos Station wallet, as well as Mintscan, Commonwealth, who's sort of building this like uh, um, governance dashboard that most Cosmos chains use, and then Skiff, who I think is an extremely cool example of bridging Web2 like UX for like email, calendar, Google Drive, and things like that, and also attaching kind of this like Web3 identity part. And what you realize here is that, like, yeah, basically almost all of these teams are teams that aren't building like blockchains itself or like smart contracts, but like, they're still crypto companies in the sense that like their core product relates directly into using the blockchain, but very much closer to the user side than the blockchain side. And I felt like, making sure that like a name service being led by these people who have built software for users rather than building blockchains, uh, allows you to kind of have things on the roadmap and features that uh, you you wish you had as someone who's building software, like user facing software. And I think that's kind of the key differences as well for things. And that's why our entire distribution mechanism is like not reliant on like incentivizing token holders or anything. Like, there will be a minting fee. I don't think the committee has come to consensus on how much that would be. To be honest, I think the entire purpose of the minting fee there is mostly to prevent like spam, like so that like someone doesn't have 100 Twitter accounts and try to claim everything. um that being said, that's just going to be put in the treasury, and we actually kept it like pretty vague intentionally because we're like, yeah, we're going to have potentially money flowing in, but we're not entirely sure what the right way to distribute this is. And trying to decide this when Cosmos is still a fairly underrated, um, underexposed like crypto ecosystem in the market, and setting that in stone, I think is the wrong idea. I think having more of this flexible way of accommodating a growing ecosystem, different types of stakeholders and things like that is the right kind of direction. And um, as much as we love, like immutability, I think there are parts where you build things on immutable software with the acknowledgement that like the value of this like immutable software comes from like mutable, like very like mutable humans, right? And I think we just kind of took this very pragmatic approach of like, yeah, I think we have the right set of people who bring a lot of value for building user-facing software in the Cosmos ecosystem, but we're not sure what the right way of incentivizing these different entities is, because we feel like that would change dramatically as time progresses. So yeah, I think that's kind of the unknown.
So I'm not sure if what I'm hearing is there is going to be a token that is going to be instantiated to charge a minting fee for the creation of names to prevent spam, or there is not going to be a token, like a new token, and we may use some existing token. Which one is it?
Yeah. So right now, ICNS is currently under a contract upload proposal on the Osmosis blockchain, and I think just for the ease of use, because it's on the Osmosis blockchain, we will use Osmo to as the minting fee. Ideally, I would like ICNS to exist on its like own chain, but like I don't know. I felt like it just didn't feel right to have a massive overhead of running uh, a name service chain at this stage where we're just bootstrapping. Um, Personally, I don't expect to have like an ICNS token ever, because I think it's more of a service that you use, and it's meant to be more of this like public goods aspect rather than like speculating on the namespace itself. So yeah, in the short answer, I think there will be a minting fee. It will be denominated in Osmo, probably roughly. I think we're still trying to decide what the right like amount is, but probably at around like $1 ish. And then that being said, that will just go to the ICNS treasury, and it'll just sort of sit there for now. TBD on how it will be used to incentivize things like people like verifiers, integrators, and other kind of like developers and things like that. So yeah, not going to some community pool or burnt or anything.
Got it. So that being said, it's built as a CosmWasm contract, right? So in order for it to be future proof and integratable with other name services, such as Star Name, for example, if it wants to integrate with ICNS, and such as Stargaze's upcoming project, how can they do that?
Yeah, so the way that we've sort of internally decided on the suffixes, I guess, such as like dot stars, dot osmo. I think there is a massive UX benefit of like saying, hey, if you as a user, you basically get to decide where you want to map your name and address to. Uh, if Stargaze as a chain, doesn't want to use ICNS as the dot stars name service, I think you just sort of opt out of it as a chain. You just submit a governance proposal and say, hey, we'd like our own name service. Keep us out of it. And then, ICNS will just not choose to use that suffix as part of kind of like this TLD as well. So kind of keeping it simple as well initially. And I think the issue becomes when, let's say, Stargaze name service um, is also kind of creating these like .osmo, .cosmos, .juno suffixes, and ICNS will do this as well. So now, if you query Dogemos.osmo, depending on which name services that you ask, you could get 2, 3, different addresses on it, and for me, I feel like that's a massive UX failure. And for me, I felt like it's like, yeah, who gets to decide? And I think, it's like the consensus of the user like facing software developers is what matters the most. That being said, I think we are open to just giving the option of the users being able to choose. Just have to think around the UX nuance as well as the confusion where like you try to send money to Dogemos, but you accidentally send it to the wrong account because you didn't realize it was mapped to a different name service versus the one that you thought you were sending it to. So I think these are the things that we just need to figure out before we're able to kind of like fully interoperate. That being said, keeping a namespace, like keeping a suffix blank, for the future where like you're able to kind of integrate um, completely new suffix into this like existing domain name service. I think that's kind of the first kind of step, making sure that there is room to interoperate in the future.
Well, sorry. When you say domain name service, you're talking about actual DNS, right? Is that what you're talking about?
I
No.
don't think we're even like
Okay.
going as far as like DNS at least at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So for our purposes, in an ideal world, from a user perspective, you want no suffix name collision, meaning no collision on the words after the dot. So the idea is if someone is sending money, if I'm sending money from chango.osmo and I want to send you, Dogemos, Juno on Juno Chain, the idea is that I could send Osmo to dogemos.juno, and then what you end up having on Juno is like a wrapped Osmo on the Juno chain.
Yeah, but I think that also just sort of depends on like, because like if you're doing this on a command line, you basically have to specify a contract to do the resolution of these names. When you're on an interface, like whatever that interface defaults to is basically where it gets sent to. So we need to be able to provide an option to change that. Now, can we do that for every single name service that exists? Like realistically, I think, you know, in terms of the resource that goes into that, probably no. Yes, probably for like the bigger ones, I think. But yeah, I think that's kind of the one of the unknowns still right now.
So let me ask you this: is this the direction where every single person has multiple of the same prefixes, like Dogemos, but on various different chains with different suffixes, like stars, Juno? Or is the direction that because this is natively interchain derived, that we're going to have only like one canonical name within ICNS, and I could just send to Dogemos.cosmos, let's say, and then it'll route to where you intend to route?
I think it's closer to the latter, where yeah, you
How
just
do you choose the de facto suffix that represents like the whole ecosystem?
I think that mostly depends on um a lot of the work that goes into working with like integrators, like explorers, wallets, and things like that. And I think that's where ICNS has that edge.
Okay. Well, so is the idea for them all to resolve on .osmo or something? Or
Wait,
.cosmos?
well, for .osmo, you're basically able to designate. So it's actually this notion of top level domains for ICNS. I think it's a little bit confusing because it's actually not top level. Um, what we're
Fair.
basically allowing you to do is like, hey, I own the namespace Dogemos, and then I can set where Dogemos.osmo goes to. Rather than I think in DNS you sort of have this backwards where the top level is like .com, .eth, whatever,
Yeah.
and then you know based off of that you map. Hey, you have Dogemos.eth, you have Chango Unchained.eth or whatever. So we're actually sort of I think we use the term TLDs a lot because that's how you know most people know it by. But
Yeah.
On a technicality level, I don't think it's actually top level. The top level is your name itself, your ICNS name, which would be, you know, in my case, my Twitter handle is Dogemos, so it's just be Dogemos. I get to decide where .osmo is mapped to in terms of the
Okay.
wallet.
So the suffix doesn't have any material meaning from a DNS context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So right. I see. Okay. And so right now, the way ICNS is implemented is one that gives you freedom to do that, because you can't apply a DNS ICANN mental model to this because it doesn't exist
Exactly.
there.
Yeah,
Right?
and I think trying to do that, you basically say, it's like who gets to decide, right? Like if I say, hey, .com, I get to rule over .com, and then this other, group of people say, no, I get to rule .com. Like, who wins out, right? I think typically this is one of those things where you win out by social consensus, by momentum of how many people are using it, and things like that. So
Yeah, and then you really fall into the trap of Web2 and traditional domain naming, and then that's a whole other hornet's nest on its own.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got couple final questions before we wrap up. And just for everyone who's in the audience, again, we're picking out questions based on super chats from now going forward. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so. And I'll pick it out at the end of the show. Last question. So phishing. So I've experienced this recently. Somebody went and minted my name on ENS, and they DM'd me saying, hey, look, I've got Chango.eth.
Yeah.
If you want it, you could buy it from me. So what happens if that happens and the name of the owner doesn't actually belong to the owner, and other users assume that it does belong to you, and then they start sending money there?
Yeah. So first of all, just to clarify it, I don't think the intention is like ICNS will forever match your Twitter handle. As like, it's like, hey, if I ever change my Twitter handle from Dogemos to, I don't know, like Dogemosis, like will my ICNS name also automatically change to Dogemosis? And the answer is no. So you do really have to see this more like a hard spoon, where like we're taking a continuous snapshot over the course of a year, where you basically get to claim your Twitter handles and use that as your ICNS, because we're making the assumption that, hey, if you're willing to use this set of strings as your Twitter handle, we assume that like you're at least somewhat okay with what it means, what its value is to you. So I think, within that first year, I think what's nice is that, hey, it's like the chances of, it's like, oh, someone's like, hey, I am Chango, please send money to Chango.osmo. You can sort of check on their Twitter and be like, hey, is Chango's Twitter handle Chango at Chango? And like you realize that's not true. So like that does raise a little bit of a flag. And so yeah, I think that's kind of the first nuance around that. The second thing is, I think, I don't know, like I I have a lot of pride in the name, that like the nickname that I call myself, like Dogemos, because it's just like it's two of those things that I love. It's like Dogecoin and Cosmos. I put that two together, and I just really don't like the idea of like domain name squatting and like complete auction based system, where like it's like, yeah, just because you didn't know that this like name service thing existed back in the day because you weren't a crypto user, you basically have to buy it off of this person who like is trying to flip over a name that you basically create value for throughout your career. Um, and that's why I think Twitter obviously isn't the perfect mechanism, and there's a lot of issues with how the namespace was distributed. That being said, I think it has more history of existing as a somewhat of a neutral namespace, because people didn't have an expectation of monetizing handles mostly. So I think it's a semi realistically fair mechanism, and in the future I think we're open to kind of different options for that. But yeah, I think that's kind of the key benefit here, is that um, you don't have to fight over your own name on the first day of launch. Like, you have this like very long, initially a year claim period, where that like, yeah, I don't have to rush in to claim my Dogemos handle, because it does require you to verify that you own this handle on Twitter. So.
And well, the edge case that I'm thinking of is, let's say in a year from now, after the redemption period,
Mhm.
if someone new to Twitter whose handle didn't exist on Twitter before wants to use ICNS. Well, this example is particularly relevant for because we're talking about onboarding the next 100 million users into crypto right? Which we're talking about mainstream adoption. Those users aren't necessarily on Twitter, but then they find out about the Keplr wallet. They want exposure to the Cosmos ecosystem, and they want to mint something, and they want some generic name like Luke.cosmos. Then, but somebody else has Luke.cosmos. That, you know, those types of phishing, and maybe they're a prominent person somewhere else, you know, or like Madonna.cosmos. What happens? You know, Madonna may not be on Twitter. I'm not sure if that's true, but she definitely doesn't have an ICNS name, or an ENS name for that matter, right? So how, I don't know, how do we solve for that edge case?
I think there's kind of two different things here where I think first of all, obviously I think there will be more mechanisms of claiming um namespace that isn't on Twitter or is on Twitter but isn't claimed on ICNS. So there will be future mechanisms around that. I don't think we've really fully discussed what the right mechanism is because I don't know if auctioning that is the right move. I don't think whoever gets to it first gets to keep it is the right move either. So I think trying to find a more fair, relatively fair mechanism around that I think is good. And then obviously like um, assuming that you're able to auction or buy namespaces or claim it before everyone else does on some of these namespaces, like I don't know, like Coke.osmo, it will be more valuable. That being said, I always feel like the meaning, like the value, but like Coke.osmo doesn't mean much if you know that Coca-Cola as a company is like, yeah, that's not our official handle. So it's like I think value comes from the legitimacy of your brand, your name, your whatever you say has meaning, rather than it's like, oh, because I own Coke.osmo, I can't go tell Coca-Cola saying it's like, yeah, I am the legitimate Coca-Cola, because they have other means of verifying that no, that's not us, we actually use another handle. And um, so I think identifiers follow identity, not the other way around.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so yeah, that's a wrap in terms of all of the questions that I have. Do you want to go over any housekeeping items, Dogemos, like any announcements, dates, things that people should know, when they could claim, stuff like that?
Yeah, so in terms of dates, I think so right now we do have the proposal to upload the 3 contracts to Osmosis Chain Live. So please take a look at it. Feel free to take a look at the code, vote on it if you'd like. And then our aim is to launch this by next week. So I think we're very much on track for it. I think one of the kind of key nuances around this is we've been working with the different integrators such as Cosmos Station, Skiff, and Commonwealth. I think in terms of the order of integrations and when like you can use ICNS names as part of the service, could take a little bit more time in between different things. Keplr were going like ham, like our entire team is just going crazy on um, making sure this is done by next week. I believe Cosmos Station will follow very shortly after. They've been uh, working very hard on just reviewing the code and making sure the queries and things like that are in line. Um, I am not entirely sure on the Skiff and Commonwealth integration for now. That being said, Skiff has been the team that's built our Twitter verifier software. So hopefully we can get to that very soon. And yeah, I'd like to take the last week of this year off a little bit, take a little a week vacation. So just so that I can get a little bit of a break, we're trying to make sure we launch on time before the end of the year is complete. And yeah.
All right. And that being said, that concludes our show. And we'll see you all next year. have a happy holiday season, including you, Dogemos. Don't work too hard. It's a bear market, by the way. So,
It's been fun.
yeah, I mean, by the way, just so you know that's an arbitrary deadline, right? Like no one's pushing you to launch on that specific date. So just don't burn out. Um,
Yeah.
by the
Well,
way,
I mean, I don't know. I think I enjoy the dopamine rush of like you work to get something launched on a deadline and then you launch it and then just seeing users use it, seeing people like it. I think it's a huge. It's almost like a drug that you sort of get addicted to, or like leading up to that launch, it's like excruciatingly difficult. But like when you do it, it's very rewarding. That was the case for Keplr. It was the case for Osmosis. So I
not
expect
the
this to
case
be
for
the case
Cosmos,
for
though.
yeah. You guys are responsible dopamine users. So yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you all for tuning in live. If you're tuning in later after the recording, be sure to like and again subscribe if you aren't already. And thank you for supporting this channel and sticking with us, even though it is a bear market, even though everything is wrecked, everything's going to come back up. So that's the silver lining. All right. Talk to you guys later.
Bye.